The portrait on the wall had begun to crack. Not from age, though it was 217 years old, but from neglect. Lucian Ashworth stood before it in the dying light of his study, watching dust motes drift through the amber glow of the setting sun. His third wife stared back at him from the canvas. Margaret. She had been 34 when the artist captured her likeness, her hair still golden, her smile still believing in forever. 6 months later, that hair had turned silver. 2 years after that, she was gone. Lucian turned away. 340 years was too long to keep counting the dead. The knock at the door came softly as all things came softly in Thornfield Manor. The servants had learned over the decades that sudden sounds disturbed the Duke. They had learned many things about him, these careful, quiet people who tended his estate, and asked no questions about why he never aged, why he was never seen in daylight, why the kitchens prepared meals he never ate. "Enter," Lucian said. Celestine glided into the room, his sister, his only constant in 3.5 centuries of variables. She looked 32, would always look 32, just as he would always appear 28. The curse and gift of their bloodline frozen in the prime of life, while the world aged around them like fruit left too long in the sun. "You're brooding again," she said. "Not a question. I'm reflecting. On what? The futility of existence, the crushing weight of immortality. On Margaret." Celestine's expression softened. She had liked Margaret, had warned Lucian against marrying her anyway. "She's been gone 30 years, brother." "Has it been 30? Lucian touched the cracked portrait, felt the dried oil paint rough beneath his fingertips. "It feels like yesterday. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like both at once." That's the nature of time for creatures like us. It pools and stretches until nothing has meaning anymore. Celestine moved to the window, looking out over the grounds. The summer garden party preparations were visible from here, servants arranging tables on the Waverley estate across the valley. "Is that why you're staring at the Waverley house, planning to attend their little gathering?" "I'm planning something more elaborate than attendance." Celestine turned, interest flickering in her ancient eyes. "Do tell." Lucian reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a worn shirt. The fabric was rough, homespun, the collar frayed beyond repair. His groundskeeper had tried to throw it away twice. Lucian had retrieved it both times. "I'm going to test them," he said. "Test who?" "Everyone. The ladies who will attend that party, the daughters of society paraded in their finest silks, hunting for advantageous marriages." Lucian held up the shirt. "I'm going to see who they truly are when they think no one of consequence is watching." Celestine crossed her arms. "You're going to disguise yourself. As a gardener, an old one, decrepit, bent, invisible." He smiled without humor. "The kind of man society has been trained to look through rather than at." "Why?" "Because I'm tired, Celestine. Tired of the performance. Tired of women who see the Duke and not the man. Tired of beginning relationships built on deception and ending them in graveyards." He set the shirt down carefully. "If I'm going to do this again, if I'm going to risk loving someone who will inevitably leave me, I need to know her kindness is real. Not calculated, not performed, real." Celestine studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You're going to get hurt." "I've been hurt before." Not like this, because this time you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You're looking for something that may not exist." "One person," Lucian said quietly. "Just one person who would show kindness to an old gardener who can offer them nothing. That's all I'm asking the universe to provide. Is that really so impossible?" "In my experience," Celestine moved toward the door. "Yes, people are people, brother. They respond to power and beauty and youth. You cannot fault them for being what the world taught them to be." "Can I?" She paused in the doorway. "How long since you've fed? 3 days. Feed before you go. You'll need your strength if you're planning to spend hours bent over rose bushes playing at being human." She hesitated. "And Lucian, if you do find her this perfect creature capable of pure kindness, what then? Will you tell her what you are? Will you watch her grow old and die like all the others, or will you condemn her to this?" She gestured at herself, at him, at the grand empty house that had been their prison for centuries. Lucian didn't answer. Celestine left him alone with the cracked portrait and the impossible question. The morning of the garden party arrived with the kind of crystalline brightness that hurt Lucian's eyes even through the heavy curtains. He had fed the night before, carefully taking only what he needed from the deer that roamed his forest. Enough to maintain his strength, not enough to feel fully alive. He never felt fully alive anymore. The transformation took 2 hours. His valet Harrison had served the Ashworth family for 43 years. He had been a young man when he arrived at Thornfield, had grown old in its service, and had never once remarked upon the fact that the Duke who hired him looked identical to the Duke who employed him now. Some things Harrison had learned were better left unspoken. "The face putty, your grace," Harrison said, holding up a tin of theatrical makeup that Lucian had acquired from a London costume shop. "This will age you considerably." "Good." They worked in silence. Harrison applied the putty to Lucian's face, creating deep lines around his eyes, pulling his skin into jowls, adding the weight of 7 decades to his features. A wig came next, gray and thinning, false eyebrows bushy and unkempt, yellowed teeth that slipped over Lucian's own, concealing their predatory sharpness. When Harrison finally stepped back, a stranger stared out from Lucian's mirror. An old man, bent, weathered. The kind of servant who had given his youth to estate work and had nothing left but the slow march toward an unremarkable end. "Remarkable," Harrison murmured. Lucian tested his movements, hunching his shoulders, letting his hands tremble slightly. The role settled over him like a familiar coat. He had played many parts across the centuries. Street urchin, scholar, soldier, duke. What was one more, the groundskeeper's clothes are laid out in the servants' quarters, Harrison said. "I've arranged for you to arrive at the Waverley estate as Tama, a day laborer hired to help with the party preparations. You've thought of everything. I've served you long enough to anticipate your eccentricities, your grace." Harrison's expression turned serious. "Though I confess this may be your most unusual venture yet. Unusual times call for unusual measures. And if you find what you're looking for—" Lucian studied his aged reflection. "Then I'll face the question Celestine asked, how to love someone without destroying them. Love doesn't destroy your grace. Time does. For creatures like me, they're the same thing." The Waverley estate glittered in the afternoon sun like something from a fairy tale. Lucian, now fully transformed into Thomas the gardener, approached through the servants' entrance, his borrowed tools heavy in his calloused hands. They had given him real calluses. Harrison had thought of that too, roughening Lucian's palms with pumice and careful friction until they looked like they belonged to a man who had spent 50 years working in the earth. The head groundskeeper barely glanced at him. "You're the extra hand from the agency." "Yes, sir, Thomas." "Good. The roses need trimming. Start with the south garden. Lady Waverley wants everything perfect for her guests." The groundskeeper's gaze swept over Lucian's bent form dismissively. "Try to stay out of sight of the ladies when they arrive. They don't like to be reminded of, well, you understand." Lucian understood perfectly. He took his shears and his wheelbarrow and made his way to the rose beds. The sun beat down mercilessly, and he was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Vampires could tolerate daylight contrary to popular myth, but it was never comfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit a constant awareness of being in the wrong element. The first carriage arrived at 2:30. Lucian watched from behind his roses as Lady Victoria Ashford swept across the lawn, her parasol creating a perfect circle of shade, her dress the color of fresh cream. Beautiful, wealthy, 23 years old and already calculating her next advantageous connection. She didn't look at him, didn't even glance in his direction. Neither did the Pemberton sisters, arriving in a flurry of laughter and expensive perfume. Neither did the Honorable Miss Catherine Wells, nor Miss Violet Montgomery, nor any of the 15 carefully selected young women who represented the finest of 3 counties' aristocratic breeding. Lucian became invisible. It was fascinating in a bitter way. He had been Duke of Thornfield for over a century, had commanded attention merely by entering a room, and now stooped and aged and dressed in rough cotton, he might as well have been part of the landscaping. He worked steadily, pruning roses that didn't need pruning, creating busy work to justify his presence. His back, though it didn't truly ache, played the part convincingly. He straightened slowly, pressing one dirt-stained hand against his lower spine, and watched Lady Victoria drop her handkerchief not 3 feet from where he knelt. She waited, her posture expectant, one delicate foot tapping. Lucian didn't move. Her expression soured. She snapped her fingers at a passing footman who retrieved the handkerchief with a deep bow that she accepted as her due. The afternoon crawled forward. The sun climbed higher. Lucian's disguise grew uncomfortable under the heat, the putty on his face beginning to itch. He had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely miserable in his own skin. Miss Violet Montgomery walked past, discussing the weather. Her skirts brushed against the wheelbarrow Lucian had positioned in the path. She stepped around it without breaking stride, without acknowledging his existence, her conversation never pausing. The Pemberton sisters admired a fountain posed beside it for an imaginary portrait and walked away without noticing the potted lavender one of them had knocked over with a careless gesture. Soil spread across the flagstones. Lucian, watching from 20 feet away, wondered if he should clean it up to maintain his cover. He decided against it. Let them see their own carelessness reflected back at them. 3 hours passed. 3 hours of being invisible, of being less than furniture, of being the kind of non-person that society had agreed to ignore for the comfort of those who mattered. Lucian had almost given up, had almost abandoned this foolish experiment and returned to Thornfield to brood in his study, to stare at cracked portraits and wonder why he kept hoping for something different when the centuries had taught him that people were exactly what Celestine said they were. Then he heard the voice. "Excuse me, sir." Lucian looked up from the hedge he had been savaging with more violence than necessary. She stood at the edge of the gravel path, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. Her dress was simpler than the others, a soft dove gray that had been washed so many times it had faded at the seams. No jewelry except a simple cameo brooch at her throat. Her dark hair was pinned up, practically without the elaborate curls the other ladies favored. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional way. Her features were too strong, her expression too direct. But her eyes were extraordinary, deep brown and clear, and startlingly honest, like looking into still water on a cloudless day. "Yes, miss," Lucian heard his voice come out rough gravelly, the voice of an old man unused to being addressed. "You've been working since morning." Not a question. "I saw you when I arrived. You haven't stopped once." He blinked. She had noticed him. Hours ago she had noticed him and remembered. "It's my work, miss." "Yes, but it's nearly 80 degrees and I haven't seen you take any water." She held out a tin cup, condensation beating on its sides. "The refreshment table is just there, but I thought, well, you seemed quite occupied." Lucian stared at the cup, at her hand extended toward him without hesitation. No gloves, he noticed. Her nails were trimmed short and practical. There was a small ink stain on her index finger. "That's very kind," he managed. "It's basic decency." She stepped closer, still holding out the cup, which seems to be in rather short supply today. There was something in her tone. Not bitterness exactly, but a dry observation that suggested she had noticed the same things he had. The carelessness, the casual dismissal of anyone deemed unimportant. Lucian took the cup. Their fingers brushed briefly. His hands were cold. They were always cold, had been cold for centuries, the sluggish blood of the undead never quite achieving human warmth. She noticed immediately. "Your hands are freezing." Concern flooded her face. "Are you unwell? Should you be working in this heat?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Centuries of existence, decades of carefully maintained distance from humanity. And here was this woman, this stranger in a faded gray dress, worried about him, about Thomas the gardener, about a non-person that everyone else had agreed to pretend didn't exist. When was the last time someone had worried about his well-being? Margaret, perhaps, before the illness took her, before she grew too weak to think of anyone but herself. "I'm fine, miss. Just poor circulation. Old bones." She didn't look convinced. "There's shade by the oak tree. You should rest there for a while, please." The water was cool and tasted faintly of lemon. Lucian drank it in 3 long swallows, surprised by how good it felt despite his body's lack of true need. It was the gesture that mattered, the kindness freely given without expectation of return. "Thank you," he said, handing the cup back. "Truly. You're welcome." She smiled then, and it transformed her entire face, softening the strong features into something approaching radiance. "I'm Rosalind Hartwell." Not a name he recognized, not from the major families, not from his mother's endless catalogs of suitable matches. She was outside the aristocratic circle entirely. "I'm Thomas," Lucian heard himself say. The false name came easier this time. "Well, Thomas, you're doing lovely work with the roses. They'll be spectacular next week." She glanced back toward the main party where the other ladies had gathered near the refreshment tables, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. "I should return before my cousin notices I've wandered off. She tends to worry." "Your cousin brought you?" Lucian asked, wanting to keep her there just a moment longer, wanting to extend this strange, wonderful conversation with someone who saw him as human. "Yes, Beatrice Waverley. She's the hostess." Rosalind's expression turned slightly rueful. "She means well dragging me to these things. She thinks I should get out more, meet people, though I suspect I'm rather hopeless at it." "You seem to be managing well enough." "Do I?" Rosalind laughed quietly. I've spent most of the afternoon hiding in the library. I only came out because I felt guilty about Beatrice going to all this trouble. And then I saw you and thought, she trailed off looking suddenly self-conscious. Well, I should go. Wait. Lucian set down his shears, straightened as much as his disguise allowed. Will you be at the dinner tomorrow night? Lord Waverley was hosting a formal dinner, the traditional conclusion to the garden party weekend. Lucian had been invited in his true capacity as Duke of Thornfield. He had planned to attend to observe these same women when they knew he was in the room. Rosalind shook her head. Oh no, that's just for the primary guests. I'm only here for the day. She gestured vaguely at the grand house. Beatrice tried to insist I stay, but I don't really belong at something so formal. There was no self-pity in her voice, just plain statement of fact. She understood the social divisions and accepted them without rancor. Lucian found himself objecting to those divisions more than he ever had before. Perhaps, he stopped himself. He couldn't ask to see her again, not as Thomas, and he couldn't reveal himself, not yet. Not until he understood what this feeling was, this strange warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Perhaps we'll meet again, he said instead. Perhaps. Rosalind smiled once more, that warm, genuine smile that made something in his chest constrict. Goodbye, Thomas. Stay in the shade when you can. She walked back toward the party, her simple dress moving easily in the breeze. Lucian watched her rejoin the group, saw Beatrice Waverley reach out to squeeze her hand affectionately. They stood together, slightly apart from the others, and he realized Rosalind hadn't been exaggerating. She was there, but not of there. An outsider just as he had made himself. Lucian picked up his shears again, but his hands were trembling. He had found her. After 3 hours of watching society's casual cruelty, after centuries of searching for something real, he had found exactly what he had been looking for. A woman who saw people, who noticed a gardener working in the heat and thought to bring him water, who worried about a stranger's cold hands and meant it. And he had lied to her, called himself Thomas. Let her think he was someone he wasn't. Let her offer kindness to a fiction. The weight of the deception settled over him like a shroud. Thornfield Manor felt emptier than usual when Lucian returned that evening. Harrison helped him remove the disguise in silence, peeling away the putty and the wig and the yellowed teeth until Lucian's true face emerged from beneath the theatrical aging. He looked at himself in the mirror, 28 years old forever, handsome in the cold, perfect way of marble statues, untouched by time, untouchable. A success, Your Grace? Harrison asked, gathering the discarded costume pieces. I found her. Ah, Harrison paused. And does she know what she's found? She thinks she found Thomas, an old gardener who needed water. I see. Do you, Lucian turned from the mirror, do you see the problem, Harrison? I set out to test their kindness to find someone real, and I built the entire foundation on a lie. You built it on a truth, Your Grace. The truth of who people are when they think no one important is watching. The disguise was merely the method of revelation. Pretty words for ugly deception. Harrison set down the wig carefully. What do you plan to do? I don't know. Lucian moved to the window, looking out over his estate. Darkness had fallen completely, now his preferred element. The world looked softer in shadow, less sharp, less real. Find her again. Tell her the truth. Hope she understands. And if she doesn't, then I'll have my answer. I'll know that kindness has limits, that even the purest gesture can be tainted by circumstances. Or, Harrison said quietly, you'll know that you sabotaged the very thing you were searching for. The observation stung because it was true. A knock at the door interrupted them. Celestine entered without waiting for invitation, as was her habit. She took one look at Lucian's face and sighed. You found someone. How do you know? Because you have that look. That hopeless, hopeful look you get when you've convinced yourself that this time will be different. She crossed to his desk, picked up a book without really seeing it. Tell me about her. Her name is Rosalind Hartwell. She brought water to a gardener. She worried about his cold hands. That's all. That's everything. Celestine set down the book. I've already looked into her. Don't make that face. You asked me to investigate all the guests weeks ago. Rosalind Hartwell, 26 years old widow. Her husband died 3 years ago of pneumonia. She owns a bookshop on the east side of town, lives above it, in 2 rooms, barely makes enough to pay her rent. Beatrice Waverley has offered to take her in repeatedly. She always refuses. Why, pride probably, or independence, or both. Celestine studied him. She's exactly what you were looking for, isn't she? Kind, genuine, struggling enough that your wealth could solve all her problems, which makes you wonder if that's all she'll see. The Duke who can rescue her from poverty. She didn't know I was the Duke. No, she knew you were Thomas, an old servant with nothing to offer. And she was kind anyway. Celestine moved closer. So now, what you reveal yourself tomorrow? Show up at her little bookshop as the Duke of Thornfield and hope she doesn't feel manipulated. Hope she sees past the test to the intention behind it. I have to try. Why? The question came sharp. Why this woman, this moment? You've gone decades without pursuing anyone. Why now? Lucian thought about Rosalind's eyes, clear and honest, and seeing him truly seeing him even through the disguise. Because I'm tired of existing in isolation. Because when she looked at me, I felt human, yes. Celestine was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Then you should find her. Tell her the truth, all of it. Even the vampire part. Especially the vampire part. If you're going to do this, if you're going to risk your heart again, then do it honestly. No more tests, no more disguises. Just truth, however terrifying. Lucian laughed without humor. You've changed your tune. This morning you were telling me love only brings grief. It does, but apparently we Ashworths are gluttons for punishment. Celestine touched his shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. Besides, I saw her from a distance at the party. She looks like she could handle the truth. There's steel underneath that quiet kindness. I hope you're right. I'm always right. It's the burden of living this long. After Celestine left, Lucien sat alone in his study, staring at Margaret's cracked portrait. His third wife, his last attempt at mortal love. She had been kind too in her way, but her kindness had been the polished practice variety of the aristocracy. Charity work and gentle condescension to those less fortunate. Rosalind's kindness had been different, direct, unpracticed, born from genuine concern rather than social obligation. He wanted to see her again, wanted to know if that moment in the garden had been as real as it felt, or just his desperate solitude painting meaning onto a simple gesture. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he would find her bookshop present himself as Duke Lucian Ashworth and confess the deception. He would watch her face when she realized that Thomas the gardener and the Duke of Thornfield were the same person. Would watch her decide if the test had been clever or cruel. Would watch her walk away or, against all probability, stay. Lucian closed his eyes and let himself remember the feeling of her hand brushing his as she offered the cup of water. That brief moment of connection. That glimpse of something he thought he'd lost long ago. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, foolish hope. But hope nonetheless. And in the darkness of Thornfield Manor, surrounded by portraits of the dead and memories of all his failures at love, Lucian Ashworth decided that hope was worth the risk of another heartbreak. Even if it meant revealing not just his deception, but his nature. Even if it meant watching another woman he loved grow old and die or face the terrible choice of joining him in eternal night. One more time. He would try one more time. For Rosalind, for kindness, for the simple, profound miracle of being seen as human by someone who had every reason to look away. The moon rose over Thornfield, cold and distant and eternal. Lucian barely noticed. He was thinking about water in a tin cup and eyes the color of deep earth and the possibility that somewhere in England there lived a woman who might love a monster if he asked her honestly enough. Tomorrow would tell. Tonight he would let himself believe. The bookshop smelled of old affairs and quiet dreams. Rosalind stood behind the counter Tuesday morning, trying to focus on the ledger in front of her, trying not to think about those frozen hands and ancient eyes and a gardener named Thomas who had looked at her like she mattered. 3 days had passed since the garden party. 3 days of ordinary life. Opening the shop at 9, dusting shelves that never seemed to stay clean, helping the occasional customer who wandered in looking for something specific they could never quite name. Mrs. Patterson had come in yesterday wanting a book about roses. She'd left with a novel about a woman who ran away to Scotland. Rosalind had learned over 3 years of running the shop that people rarely knew what they truly needed until you showed it to them. She wondered what Thomas needed. Stop it, she told herself. He was a gardener at an estate you'll never visit again. A moment of connection that meant nothing. A kind gesture repaid with a kind word. That's all. But his hands had been so cold. The bell above the door chimed. Rosalind looked up from the ledger, a polite greeting already forming on her lips. It died there. The man standing in her doorway was not Thomas. This man was young, beautiful in a way that made the words seem inadequate, tall and lean with dark hair that fell just so across his forehead. His clothes were immaculate, tailored with the kind of precision that spoke of wealth beyond imagining. His boots gleamed like black mirrors. But his eyes were Thomas's eyes, ancient and startling in their familiarity. Rosalind's pen slipped from her fingers. It clattered against the counter, rolled, fell to the floor with a sound like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "Hello, Rosalind," he said quietly. She knew that voice. Knew it even though it no longer carried the rough gravel of age, even though it came from a throat that had never bent under 70 years of labor. "You're not a gardener," she heard herself say. "No." He took a step forward, stopped when she flinched. "I'm not." The shop felt too small suddenly, too warm. The familiar space where she had built her careful, solitary life seemed to shrink around her until there was only this stranger who was not a stranger, this lie walking toward her in expensive boots. "My name is Lucian Ashworth." He held his hat in both hands, turning it slowly. A nervous gesture that seemed wrong on someone who looked like a portrait come to life. "I'm the Duke of Thornfield." Of course he was, because nothing in Rosalind's life could ever be simple. Because the one moment of genuine connection she'd felt in 3 years had been built on deception. Because she was a fool who had offered water to a man playing dress-up and thought it meant something. Why? The word came out harder than she intended. Lucian set his hat on a stack of books, then seemed to think better of it and picked it up again. "I wanted to see them as they really were. The women at the party. I needed to know who they were when they thought no one important was watching." "So you tested them?" Rosalind crossed her arms, holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Like an experiment." "Yes," at least he didn't try to deny it. "And did we pass?" She heard the bitterness in her voice, didn't try to hide it. "Did we perform adequately for your entertainment?" "Rosalind, you let me think you were someone else. Someone real, someone who—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I felt sorry for you. I worried about you. And all the while you were laughing at—" "I wasn't laughing." Lucian moved closer slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "I wasn't laughing at you. I was amazed by you." Pretty words. True words. He stopped at the counter, the physical barrier between them suddenly feeling symbolic. They walked past me like I was invisible. All of them. Lady Victoria, the Pemberton sisters, every single woman who smiled so beautifully when they thought someone important might notice. "But you," his voice softened. "You saw me." "I saw Thomas," Rosalind corrected. "A gardener who needed water. I didn't see you." "You did, though. That's what you don't understand." Lucian leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter. His fingers were long and pale, graceful as a pianist's. "The gardener was more honest than the Duke has been in years. When I'm Lucian Ashworth, people perform for me. They tell me what they think I want to hear. They see the title and the estate, not the person underneath. But with you for those few minutes in the garden, I was simply a man, and you were simply kind." Rosalind wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to her righteous indignation to tell this beautiful liar to leave her shop and never return. But she kept remembering the look in his eyes when she'd offered him water, the shock, the gratitude, the raw, unguarded emotion that had flickered across his face like candlelight through glass. That hadn't been performance. That had been real. "You should have told me the truth," she said finally. "I know. You made me feel foolish. That was never my intention. And yet here we are." She gestured at the space between them, at the impossible gulf of class and circumstance. "A duke and a shopkeeper. How does this story end?" "You are Grace." Lucian flinched at the title. "However you want it to. I came to apologize. To tell you the truth, even though it makes me look like exactly what I am, a man who resorted to tricks because he'd forgotten how to trust genuine feeling." The admission hung in the air between them. Rosalind studied his face, really looked at it. The classical features, the perfect symmetry, the kind of beauty that seemed almost artificial in its precision. But underneath in those strange, weary eyes, she saw something else. Sadness. Bone deep and endless. "I knew something was different about you," she said quietly. "When we spoke in the garden, your eyes looked old, like you'd seen too much, like you'd lived too long." Lucian went very still. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It was just a feeling." Rosalind shook her head. "You looked at me like you were surprised I existed. Like kindness was some rare miracle you'd stopped believing in." He laughed then, but there was no humor in it. "You see too much, Rosalind Hartwell." "Is that a problem?" "It might be." Before she could ask what he meant, the bell chimed again. Beatrice swept into the shop in a rustle of silk and expensive perfume, already talking. "Rosalind, darling, I've been thinking about the party, and I simply must apologize for She stopped short, seeing Lucian. Her expression transformed from warm familiarity to stunned recognition. "Your Grace, I didn't realize you knew my cousin." We met at your garden party, Lucian said smoothly. I was admiring the grounds. How lovely. Beatrice's eyes darted between them, calculating, assessing. Rosalind, why didn't you tell me you'd spoken with the Duke? It didn't seem important, Rosalind lied. Beatrice laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. The Duke of Thornfield visits your shop and it doesn't seem important. Really, darling, sometimes I worry about you. She turned to Lucian with a practiced smile. You must forgive my cousin, Your Grace. She's been living alone so long, she's forgotten how society works. On the contrary, Lucian's voice carried an edge. I find her directness refreshing. Oh, well, yes, of course. Beatrice smoothed her skirts, suddenly uncertain. I should let you both return to whatever this is. Rosalind, do come by the house this week. We need to discuss your living situation. She left in a cloud of uncomfortable energy. Lucian waited until the bell stopped chiming before speaking again. Your cousin means well. She thinks I need saving. Rosalind moved out from behind the counter, suddenly needing distance from his unsettling presence. She's been trying to marry me off since my husband died. Thinks a woman alone is a woman incomplete. And what do you think? I think being alone is better than being with someone for the wrong reasons, such as money, status, fear of dying a spinster. She met his eyes directly. Convenience. What about kindness? Lucian asked. Would that be a right reason? Kindness is a beginning, not an ending. He smiled, and for a moment he looked genuinely young. You're very wise for 26. I'm a widow who runs a failing bookshop. I've had time to learn wisdom through mistakes. Rosalind crossed to the window, looking out at the street beyond. Why are you really here, Your Grace? I told you to apologize. And you've apologized, so why are you still here? Silence stretched between them. Outside, a carriage rolled past. A woman called to her children. Life continued ordinary and oblivious. Because I can't stop thinking about you, Lucian said finally. Because in all my years, he stopped abruptly. Rosalind turned. Your years. Nothing. A slip of the tongue. But she had heard it clearly. Oh, my years. Not all my life. Years that stretched far beyond what a man of 28 should have lived. Those ancient eyes. Those frozen hands. The way he moved with a grace that seemed learned over lifetimes rather than decades. You can tell me, she said softly. Whatever it is, I won't judge. You might. Try me. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. Not yet. First, I need you to trust me. And I've already given you every reason not to. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. May I come back tomorrow, not as an apology, but as myself, whoever that is. Rosalind knew she should say no, should send this beautiful, complicated man back to his estate and his secrets, should protect her heart from another inevitable loss. But she heard herself say yes. Thank you. He smiled again, softer this time. And Rosalind, for what it's worth, Thomas wasn't entirely fiction. The man who was grateful for your kindness, who thought you were extraordinary for seeing a servant as human, that was real. That was me. He left before she could respond. Rosalind stood alone in her shop, surrounded by books she couldn't sell and memories she couldn't escape, and wondered what she had just agreed to. Lucian came every day for a week, not as the Duke of Thornfield, though he never pretended to be anything else. Just as Lucian, a man who loved books and hated crowds and smiled rarely but meant it when he did. They talked about everything and nothing, philosophy and poetry and the ridiculous nature of social hierarchies. He listened when she spoke about her late husband, about the grief that had hollowed her out and the slow, painful process of learning to be whole again. She listened when he spoke of solitude, though he never quite explained the depth of it, the weight she could sense pressing down on his words. He never ate when he visited, never accepted her offers of tea or biscuits. I'm not hungry, he always said, and she noticed he never specified when he'd last eaten. He was always cold, his hands when they accidentally brushed hers reaching for the same book. His presence in the shop like standing near an open window in winter, and he avoided the sunlight, kept to the shaded corners of the shop, moved away when afternoon sun slanted through the windows. Rosalind noticed everything. She noticed and she began to wonder. On the 5th day, she asked the question she'd been holding back. Are you a vampire, Your Grace? She said it lightly, like a joke, like she didn't mean it. Lucian, who had been examining a first edition of Paradise Lost, went very still. His fingers stopped mid-turn of a page. Why would you ask that? Because you're always cold. Because you never eat. Because you move away from sunlight like it hurts you. Because your eyes look like they've seen lifetimes, not decades. She kept her voice steady, casual. Because I read Gothic novels, your grace and you tick rather a lot of boxes. He set the book down carefully. And if I said yes, would you run screaming? I run a bookshop that barely breaks even and to live above it in 2 rooms. I'm a widow at 26 with no prospects and a cousin who thinks I'm a lost cause. Running and screaming would at least make life interesting. Despite himself, Lucian laughed. You're extraordinary. I'm practical. There's a difference. She came closer, studied his face in the dusty light. So, are you? Would you believe me if I told you the truth? I might. I've learned to keep an open mind about impossible things. But he changed the subject, asked her about a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, and the moment passed. That evening after he left, Rosalind couldn't let it go. She pulled out her oldest books, the ones she kept in the back room, too valuable to display, too strange to sell. Treatises on folklore, accounts of unexplained phenomena, a leather-bound volume from 1643 about creatures of the night. She read until her eyes burned, and she found 3 marriages recorded in the parish records she'd purchased from an estate sale. 3 women who had become Duchess of Thornfield. 3 women who had died young. The first in 1698, the second in 1787, the third in 1825. Lucian Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield, had been listed as surviving husband in all 3 death notices. The same name, the same title, spanning over a century. Rosalind sat back, her heart pounding. Impossible. Unless. The next day, Beatrice came to the shop. She didn't knock, just swept in with the kind of urgent energy that meant trouble. We need to talk about the Duke, she said without preamble. Rosalind set down the inventory she'd been tallying. Good morning to you too, cousin. Don't be flippant. This is serious. Beatrice paced the narrow shop, her expensive dress brushing against book spines. He's been visiting you every day. People are talking. Let them talk. Rosalind. Beatrice stopped, her expression torn between concern and frustration. Do you know anything about the Duke of Thornfield? About his history? I know he's wealthy and solitary and kind when he thinks no one's watching. He's dangerous. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Rosalind felt her stomach tighten. What do you mean? 3 wives, Rosalind. 3 duchesses of Thornfield, all dead within years of their marriages. All young, all under mysterious circumstances. Beatrice's voice dropped to a whisper. There are rumors. Whispers about what happens to women who get close to him. What kind of whispers? The kind people don't say out loud. The kind that get dismissed as gossip, but never quite go away. She gripped Rosalind's hands. Please, darling, be careful. I know you are grieving. I know you think he understands you. But some men are dangerous precisely because they seem understanding. After Beatrice left, Rosalind couldn't focus on anything. The shop felt claustrophobic, the walls pressing in. She closed early, went upstairs to her 2 small rooms, and sat by the window as dusk fell. 3 wives, all dead, all young. She should be afraid. Instead, she found herself thinking about the sadness in Lucian's eyes. The way he looked at her like she was something precious, he was afraid to touch. The careful distance he maintained, as if proximity itself might be dangerous. What if Beatrice was right, but not in the way she thought? What if the danger wasn't that Lucian hurt these women, but that he loved them and couldn't save them from something inevitable? The knock came just after dark. Rosalind opened the door to find Lucian standing there, shadows pooling around him like water. You know, he said, not a question. I suspect. May I come in? She stepped aside. He entered slowly, moving through her small sitting room like a ghost, touching nothing, disturbing nothing. Your cousin warned you about me, he said. She did. Are you afraid? Rosalind thought about it, really considered, then shook her head. No, I'm curious. Curiosity killed the cat. I'm not a cat, and you're stalling. Lucian turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, he looked ethereal. Too beautiful to be real. Too perfect to be human. If I tell you the truth, he said slowly, there's no going back. You'll know something that will change how you see the world, how you see me, and I can't unknow it once you know it. I already know, Rosalind said quietly. I just need you to confirm it. He studied her for a long moment. Then, with the air of a man stepping off a cliff, he spoke. I'm a vampire. I was turned in 1686. I've lived for 340 years. I've watched empires rise and fall. I've buried 3 wives, watched them age and die while I stayed frozen in time. I don't eat, I don't sleep. I exist in the spaces between life and death, neither fully one nor the other. The words hung in the air between them. Rosalind felt her knees weaken. She sat down abruptly in the nearest chair. It was one thing to suspect, another thing entirely to have it confirmed. The disguise, she said faintly. At the garden party, you made yourself look old. I wanted to see who would be kind to someone with nothing to offer. Someone at the end of their life instead of the beginning. He moved closer, knelt in front of her chair, so they were eye level. Because I'm so tired, Rosalind. Tired of existing alone. Tired of watching everyone I love turn to dust. Tired of surviving without truly living. Your wives, she whispered, they died because they were mortal and I'm not. Because time is cruel to everyone except creatures like me. Because I loved them, and love wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. Rosalind looked at him, really looked. Saw past the perfect features to the aching emptiness underneath. Saw the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the unbearable burden of outliving everyone. She should be horrified, should be running to the constable or the church or anyone who might protect her from this impossible confession. Instead, she found her hand reaching out, touching his cold cheek. You watched everyone you loved die, she said. Over and over. That's not danger, Lucian. That's tragedy. His eyes closed. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, but not of you. For you. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone. How do you bear it? Poorly. He opened his eyes and they were wet. Vampires could cry, apparently. Who knew I shouldn't have come here, shouldn't have tested you, shouldn't have pursued this? Because even if you accept what I am, even if you can look past the monster to see whatever's left of the man, it ends the same way. You'll grow old, you'll die. And I'll be here still frozen at 28 adding your portrait to my gallery of ghosts. Is there another option? The question surprised them both. Lucian pulled back slightly. What? Is there another option? Besides me growing old and dying while you stay young? Understanding dawned slowly in his expression, followed by something that looked like horror. No, absolutely not. Why not? Rosalind, do you understand what you're suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, I'm asking a question. He stood paced to the window, his hands clenched at his sides. The answer is yes. Theoretically, if you returned, made into what I am, we could have eternity together. No aging, no death, just endless night. That doesn't sound entirely terrible. Doesn't it? He spun to face her. You'd have to drink blood to survive. You'd watch everyone you know grow old and die. You'd lose your humanity, your mortality, everything that makes you who you are. You'd become a creature of shadows hidden from the sun, existing at the edges of the world. And for what? For me. For a vampire who can't even promise he'll be worth the sacrifice. Rosalind stood cross to him slowly. I lost my husband 3 years ago. He was 30 years old, Lucian. We had plans. Children, we'd never have anniversaries. We'd never celebrate a lifetime that got cut short by pneumonia and bad luck. Do you know what I learned from that? What? That life is brief and brutal and unfair. That being mortal means being fragile. That love is always a risk because time wins eventually. She touched his hand, felt the chill of his skin. You're offering me forever. Yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it's a sacrifice, but at least it's a choice. My husband didn't get a choice. He just got sick and died and left me here. Rosalind, I'm not saying yes, she interrupted. I'm not that impulsive, but I'm not saying no either. I'm saying, let me think about it. Let me understand what you're really offering before I make a decision. Lucian stared at her like she'd just spoken in tongues. Most people would run. I'm not most people. You tested that already, remember? Despite everything, he smiled. You brought water to a gardener. And you turned out to be a vampire duke. We've both had surprises this week. He laughed, then really laughed, and the sound filled her small room like music. You're a cynic. Probably, or maybe I'm just tired of being safe and grieving and waiting for my life to start again. She squeezed his hand. Tell me about it. About what it means. About what I'd be giving up and what I'd be gaining. I want to understand before I decide anything. So he told her. About the hunger that never quite went away. About learning to feed on animals instead of humans. The choice that made him different from other vampires. About the way sunlight felt like pressure against the skin bearable, but never comfortable. About watching the world change fashion and language, and entire ways of life rising and falling like tides. About emptiness that stretched across centuries until it became a kind of gravity pulling everything down into its dark center. Rosalind listened, asked questions, tried to imagine herself in his place, eternal and unchanging and utterly isolated. Why me? She asked finally. Out of everyone at that party, everyone in England, why pursue me? Because you saw me, Lucian said simply. Not Thomas the gardener or Lucian the Duke. You saw a person who needed kindness, and you gave it without thinking, without calculating what you might gain. And in all my years, I've learned that genuine kindness is rarer than immortality. He stood to leave as midnight approached. At the door, he paused. I shouldn't have told you, shouldn't have burdened you with this impossible choice. I asked. You did. He touched her face, his cold hand gentle against her warm cheek. Think carefully, Rosalind. If you choose this, if you let me turn you, there's no going back. You'll be what I am forever. And forever is a very long time to regret a decision. And if I choose not to, then I'll understand. I'll leave you in peace. I'll go back to Thornfield and my portraits of the dead, and I'll try to forget what it felt like to be seen by someone who mattered. After he left, Rosalind sat in her empty rooms and tried to make sense of the impossible choice before her. Mortality or eternity, human or vampire, safe solitude or dangerous forever. She thought about her husband dead at 30, about the life they'd planned that never happened, about the children she'd never have, the old age she might never reach. She thought about Lucian's eyes, weary and sad, and seeing her truly. She thought about kindness and what it meant to offer water to someone dying of thirst, even when that thirst had lasted centuries. The answer should have been obvious. Should have been. But as dawn crept across her window and her shop waited below silent and patient, Rosalind found herself thinking not about what she'd lose, but what she might gain. And the scales began slowly to tip. The decision took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Rosalind sitting in her bookshop, surrounded by stories of immortal love and tragic heroes trying to reconcile the impossible choice before her. 3 weeks of Lucian visiting every evening, never pressuring, never asking, just existing in her space like a question she couldn't answer. 3 weeks of Beatrice stopping by with increasingly worried looks and carefully casual questions about the Duke's intentions. 3 weeks of watching autumn turn the world gold and brittle, a reminder that everything beautiful eventually died. On the 21st day, Rosalind made her choice. Lucian arrived at dusk as he always did, moving through the shop door, like smoke settling into the chair by the window that had become his without either of them acknowledging it. He looked tired, if such a thing were possible for the immortal. The shadows under his eyes seemed darker. His movements carried a heaviness that had nothing to do with physical weight. I've decided, Rosalind said without preamble. He went very still. And I can't do it. The words fell between them like stones into deep water, sinking, final. Lucian's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes died, a light going out in a distant window. I understand. Do you come? Rosalind set down the book she'd been pretending to read. Because I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I understand why I'm saying no when every part of me wants to say yes. Then why? Because mortality is what makes kindness meaningful. She stood paced the narrow shop, her hands twisting together. If I have forever, if there's no end, no urgency, no awareness that time is finite, then what does it matter if I'm kind today or tomorrow, or a century from now? The beauty of bringing you water, Lucian, was that I had limited time, and I chose to spend it on you. I chose to see you when I could have looked away. Lucian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You think immortality would make you careless. I think it might make kindness routine instead of sacred. I think the reason that moment in the garden mattered was because it was fleeting, because both of us were aware on some level that life is brief and brutal, and every kind gesture counts. And if you're wrong, then I die having been wrong, but at least I die human. The silence that followed was vast and terrible. Finally, Lucian stood. I should go. You don't have to. I do. He picked up his coat, his movements precise and controlled. Because if I stay, I'll try to change your mind. I'll tell you that kindness doesn't expire, that you could spend eternity being good, and it would matter just as much. I'll beg, Rosalind, and neither of us deserves that indignity. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're right about mortality making things matter. I've lived for centuries, and nothing mattered until you brought me water. Nothing felt urgent or important or real. So perhaps you're wiser than I am. Lucian jaw? No. He turned, and his face was a mask of careful neutrality. This is the right choice. For you, and I'll respect it. I'll leave town tomorrow. Go back to Thornfield. Let you live your finite, meaningful life without the shadow of forever hanging over you. I don't want you to leave. I know, but I have to, because seeing you knowing I can't have you knowing you chose mortality over me. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing Rosalind had ever seen. That's a pain I'm not strong enough to bear. Not after all this time. He left without another word. Rosalind stood alone in her shop surrounded by books about great loves and noble sacrifices and wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her very finite life. Autumn became winter. Lucian kept his word. He left town the next day, returned to Thornfield Manor, disappeared behind the walls of his estate like a ghost retreating to its haunting. Rosalind told herself she'd made the right choice. Told herself that every morning when she opened the shop, every evening when she closed it, every night when she lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and didn't think about cold hands and ancient eyes, she was fine. She was human. She was making the most of her finite time. She was lying to herself. Beatrice noticed, of course. Beatrice always noticed. "You're pining," she said, one gray December morning, standing in the shop with her arms crossed and her expression torn between sympathy and exasperation. "I'm working." "You're staring at that same page you've been staring at for 10 minutes. That's not working. That's pining." Rosalind closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "What do you want me to say, Beatrice?" "That I miss him, that I made a choice and now I'm living with it." "I want you to admit you made the wrong choice. You were the one who warned me about him, who told me he was dangerous. I was wrong." Beatrice moved closer, her voice softening. "I've been asking around discreetly, about the Duke, about his history. Do you know what I found? 3 dead wives. 3 wives who were loved fiercely and mourned deeply. 3 women who died of natural causes despite all the rumors. 3 portraits he keeps in his study, all pristine or honored. He didn't hurt them, Rosalind. He lost them. And it destroyed him each time." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. "That doesn't change anything." "Doesn't it? Because from where I'm standing, you're both miserable. He's locked himself away in that enormous house, and you're here pretending your life has meaning when you look like you're barely surviving." "I'm surviving fine." "Are you, Beatrice gripped her hands. "When's the last time you smiled? When's the last time you looked forward to something instead of just enduring?" Rosalind pulled away. "This is the choice I made. Mortality over forever. Meaning over eternity. I have to stand by it." "Why, who says what if standing by it means wasting the finite time you have left, being miserable when you could be, I don't even know what, but something more than this?" After Beatrice left, Rosalind sat in the gathering darkness and let herself cry. Not for Lucian, not entirely, but for the impossibility of it all. For the choice that had seemed so clear 3 weeks ago and now felt like slow poison spreading through her veins. She had chosen mortality because it made kindness meaningful. But what good was meaningful kindness if you were too heartbroken to practice it? The winter storm hit 3 days before Christmas. Snow fell in heavy blankets, transforming the world into something silent and strange. The town huddled against the cold shops closing, early families gathering around fires, everyone waiting for the weather to break. Rosalind closed the bookshop at noon. No one would venture out in this weather. No one except her, apparently, because the moment she locked the door, she heard the screaming. A child's voice, high and terrified, coming from the direction of the river. She didn't think, just ran. The river had frozen over 2 weeks ago, but the ice was treacherous. Everyone knew it. Everyone stayed away from it. Everyone except children who didn't understand danger, who saw a smooth white surface and thought adventure instead of death. Rosalind reached the riverbank to find a small crowd gathering. A woman was screaming, pointing at the ice. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, stood in the middle of the frozen river, the ice cracking web-like beneath his feet. "Someone help him," the mother screamed. "Please, he'll fall through." The men in the crowd looked at each other. The ice wouldn't hold an adult. Everyone knew it. Going out there meant dying alongside the child. Rosalind didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the ice. It groaned beneath her weight, a sound like the world breaking. She moved forward anyway, slowly distributing her weight, trying to remember everything she'd ever heard about ice rescue. "Miss, don't," someone shouted from the shore. "You'll both drown." Probably, but she'd made her choice. Mortality made kindness meaningful, and this moment mattered more than fear. The boy was crying now, frozen in place, watching the cracks spread around him like lightning through glass. "It's all right," Rosalind called to him, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Stay very still, I'm coming to get you." She was 10 feet away when the ice gave out beneath her. The water was so cold it didn't feel like water. It felt like knives, like fire, like every nerve in her body screaming at once. She went under the current, grabbing her, pulling her down. Her heavy skirts became anchors. Her lungs burned. Her limbs stopped responding to her commands. This is how I die, she thought distantly. This is my finite life ending. This is what I chose. And somewhere in the dark water, she found she regretted it. Not the kindness, never the kindness, but the choice to stay mortal. The choice to let fear of eternity keep her from the only person who had made her feel alive in 3 years. She had been wrong. Mortality didn't make kindness meaningful. Love did. Connection did. And she had walked away from the deepest connection of her life because she was afraid of forever. Her lungs gave up. Water rushed in. The world went dark. She woke to fire. Not metaphorical fire. Actual flames racing through her veins, burning her from the inside out. Every cell screaming. Every nerve lit up like torch paper. Rosalind tried to scream, but no sound came out. I'm here, Lucian's voice close to her ear. I'm here, Rosalind. Stay with me. The fire burned hotter. She was dying, must be dying. Nothing could hurt this much and be survivable. What did you do? Another voice. Celestine. She's in agony. I'm turning her. She refused. She was dying. Lucian's voice cracked. She jumped into the river to save a child. The ice broke. She drowned. Beatrice came to me, begged me to save her, and I found her too late. She was already dead. Then how? She wasn't entirely gone. Her heart beat once more while I held her. Just once, so I chose. I bit her, I turned her, and if she hates me for it when she wakes, then at least she'll be alive to hate me. The fire reached Rosalind's heart. She did scream then, a sound that tore from her throat like something alive and desperate. How long? Celestine demanded. 3 days, maybe 4. The transformation is never certain. And if she doesn't survive, then I'll follow her. I've existed long enough. Rosalind wanted to tell him not to be stupid. Wanted to say she chose this, that she understood, that she had realized in those final moments under the ice that she'd been wrong about everything. But the fire consumed her words, consumed her thoughts, consumed everything except the unbearable agony of dying and being reborn at the same time. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only pain, only burning, only the endless transformation that remade her cell by cell, rewriting her humanity into something else. Sometimes she surfaced enough to feel Lucian holding her hand, his cold palm against her burning skin, his voice murmuring words she couldn't quite hear. Sometimes she sank so deep into the pain that she forgot who she was, forgot everything except the need to survive the next second and the next and the next. On the 3rd day, the fire began to fade. On the 4th day, it went out. Rosalind opened her eyes. The world exploded into clarity. She could see every dust mote floating through the air, could count the individual threads in the curtains across the room, could hear Lucian's breath slow and measured from the chair beside her bed, could smell old wood and melted wax and the faint copper scent of blood. She turned her head. Lucian sat slumped in the chair, his head in his hands, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. His clothes were rumpled. His hair was disheveled. He looked for the first time since she'd known him genuinely mortal. Lucian, she whispered. His head snapped up. His eyes met hers. Rosalind. He moved to the bed in a blur of motion, took her hand carefully like she might break. How do you feel? Different. She sat up slowly, testing her body. Everything moved smoothly. Too smoothly, like she was made of water instead of flesh. What did you do? I saved you or damned you, I'm not sure which. You turned me. Yes, even though I said no. Even though, he looked away. You were dead, Rosalind, or near enough. Your heart stopped beating, your lungs filled with water. You saved that child, and it killed you. Did he survive, the boy? Yes, someone else pulled him out after you went under. He's fine, you made sure of that. Rosalind processed this. She had saved him. Her finite life had ended doing something meaningful, exactly what she'd wanted, except she wasn't dead. How long, she asked. 4 days. The transformation took 4 days. You screamed for most of it. His voice broke slightly. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't let you go. Not after everything. Not when I had the power to save you. She should be angry, should feel violated. He had made the choice for her, had taken away her agency, had forced her into the very thing she had refused. But looking at his haggard face, at the tears tracking down his perfect cheeks, she found she couldn't summon rage. I was wrong, she said quietly. He blinked. What? In the water, when I was dying, I realized I was wrong. She squeezed his hand, felt the strength in her grip that hadn't been there before. I thought mortality made kindness meaningful, but I had it backward. Kindness makes mortality meaningful. And I can be kind forever, or I can be kind for 70 years, but either way, the kindness is what matters, not the timeline. Rosalind, I choose you. The words came easier this time. I choose forever. I choose being what you are, walking in shadows, drinking blood, existing outside of normal human life. I choose all of it, because I choose you and you come with conditions. Lucian laughed through his tears. I turned you against your will and you're choosing me anyway. You saved my life against my will. I think we're even. He pulled her into his arms, then held her like she might dissolve if he let go. I love you. I've loved you since you brought me water. I'll love you for the next 300 years and beyond. I get it. She pulled back enough to see his face. You love me. I love you too. Now tell me what happens next. What happened next was complicated but manageable. Beatrice had to be told. She took it better than expected, probably because she'd already suspected the Duke was something other than human. I knew it, she said, sitting in Rosalind's shop 2 weeks later. The way he moved, the way he never aged. I knew there was something. And you're all right with this. With my cousin becoming a vampire to be with the man she loves. I've seen worse marriages. Beatrice smiled sadly. You'll outlive me, you know. By centuries, probably. I know. Promise me you'll remember me. When I'm gone and you're still here, still young, still beautiful. Promise me I'll matter. Rosalind gripped her hand. You'll always matter. You forced me to go to that garden party. You gave me forever. The town had to be managed. Rosalind's death was staged carefully. A tragic accident, they said. She'd heroically saved the boy but succumbed to the cold water. The funeral was well attended. People wept. Life moved on. And in the shadows, Rosalind Ashworth, Duchess of Thornfield, learned what it meant to be a vampire. The hunger was manageable. Lucian taught her to feed on deer, on animals, never on humans. The sensitivity to sunlight was an adjustment, but she learned to love the night instead. The immortality took longest to accept, but she had Lucian. And Celestine, who eventually admitted that Rosalind was good for her brother in ways centuries of solitude hadn't been. And she had purpose. They practiced kindness deliberately and constantly, as if trying to prove that immortality didn't make meaning obsolete. It didn't. If anything, it made kindness more powerful. 50 years passed. On a cold December evening, 50 years and 3 months after Rosalind's transformation, Beatrice came to visit their bookshop located 3 towns over from where they'd met. She was 83 now, her hair was white, her hands shook with age. Her eyes were still sharp, still seeing, still Beatrice. Rosalind opened the door and felt her heart break and heal at the same time. Hello, cousin, Beatrice said. They sat together in the small parlor above the shop. Lucian made tea and left them alone. You look exactly the same, Beatrice said, her voice wavering only slightly. 26 forever. Are you still jealous of that? No, Beatrice smiled. I've lived a good life, Rosalind. I married, had children, watched them grow up and have children of their own. I've seen 73 springs. I've earned every wrinkle on my face. I'm ready to rest. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. She reached out, took Rosalind's hand. Her palm was papery and thin. I'm dying, darling. The doctors say maybe a month, and I wanted to see you one more time before I go. Rosalind felt tears she hadn't cried in decades. I'm not ready to lose you. Yes, you are. You've been saying goodbye to me since the day you were turned. Beatrice squeezed her hand. But I need you to know something. That party, the garden party where you met him, I didn't plan it for myself. I planned it for you. The Duke asked me to host it, and I knew somehow that it wasn't about those other ladies. So I forced you to come. Dragged you out of your safe little shop, and you met him. You knew. I suspected, and I was right. She smiled. Take care of him, Rosalind. Take care of yourself. And remember me when spring comes, when the gardens bloom. Remember that I loved you. That I believed in kindness as much as you do. They sat together until the tea grew cold. A week later, Beatrice died peacefully in her sleep. Rosalind and Lucian attended the funeral in heavy veils, unrecognized. They stood at the back of the church and listened to strangers eulogize a woman who had changed the course of immortal history with one garden party invitation. 200 years after that day, Rosalind stood in their bookshop holding a tin cup she'd kept since the beginning, the same cup she'd used to bring Lucian water that first afternoon. A young woman had just entered, lost, alone, her clothes worn but clean, her eyes holding the kind of sadness that came from too much loss, too young. Can I help you? Rosalind had asked gently. I'm just browsing. I don't have much money. That's all right, browsing is free. Rosalind had smiled. Would you like some water? You look like you've been walking for a while. The woman's expression had transformed. Surprise, gratitude, relief. Rosalind had poured water from the tin cup and handed it to the stranger who reminded her of herself at 26. The woman had drunk deeply. Thank you, you're very kind. It's just water. No, it's more than that. It's seeing someone, noticing them, caring enough to offer comfort when you didn't have to. That's grace, Martin. After she'd left, Lucian emerged from the back room. You gave her the cup, he said. I did. It was time for it to mean something to someone else. Lucian pulled her close. I love you. I know. I was alone for so long, and then you brought me water. And you gave me forever, Rosalind said. We gave each other forever. And they stood together in their bookshop surrounded by centuries of stories and knew that their own story was still being written. Each chapter beginning with a simple choice: to be kind, to see people, to offer water to gardeners and grace to strangers and love to those who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. The Duke had tested society and found it wanting. A widow had offered kindness and found forever. And somewhere between the test and the offer, between the disguise and the truth, between mortality and immortality, they had found each other. That was worth any sacrifice, worth any transformation, worth choosing again and again for as long as stars burned and stories were told and someone somewhere needed water.